300,000 men marched into this city. Only 5,000 ever saw home again.
Summer 1942. The Nazi war machine was unstoppable. They wanted the oil fields. They wanted the prize.
They rolled across the Russian steppes like kings. The sun was warm. Victory felt easy.
But ahead of them lay a city named after Stalin himself. An industrial monster made of steel and stone.
August 23rd. The sky turned black. The Luftwaffe dropped 1,000 tons of bombs in a single day.
The German 6th Army charged in. They thought they would take the city in a week. Just a week.
But the Russians didn't run. They hid in the sewers. They hid in the ruins. They waited.
By October, the Germans had taken 90% of the city. But they made one fatal mistake.
Their mistake was fighting on Stalin's terms. The Blitzkrieg died here. The Rat War was born.
They fought for the living room. They died for the kitchen. Every floor was a fortress.
The Russians hugged the enemy lines so close that the German Luftwaffe couldn't bomb them without hitting their own men.
While the 6th Army bled out in the ruins, they forgot to watch their backs. The flanks were guarded only by weak Romanian troops.
Out on the open steppe, the Romanian allies had no anti-tank guns. They had no heavy armor. They were sitting ducks.
Then, the temperature dropped, -20.
November 19th, the Soviets unleashed Operation Uranus. 1 million men and 1,000 tanks smashed into the weak flanks.
Stalin's organ. The Katyusha rockets screamed through the night. The encirclement had begun.
In just 4 days, the trap snapped shut. 300,000.
The Führer's order was absolute. Surrender is forbidden. The 6th Army will hold their positions to the last man and the last round. They cheered. They believed him. They thought they were the heroes of a grand story. They didn't know they were already ghosts.
Hermann Göring promised an airlift. 500 tons of food and fuel a day. A bridge of wings in the sky.
But the sky had other plans. Blizzards grounded the planes. Engines froze. The Luftwaffe was dying in the snow.
Instead of 500 tons, they got barely 100. Sometimes, they got crates of vodka and condoms instead of bread.
December 12th, one last hope. Field Marshal Manstein launched Operation Winterstorm. The relief force was coming.
Inside the city, they could hear the guns of their rescuers. Miles away!
But the Soviets threw everything they had at Manstein. The relief force hit a wall of steel and fire.
Then, the guns went silent. The tanks turned around. They were alone. 250,000 men. A bassett there.
Christmas Eve, 1942. In a dark bunker, a doctor drew the Fortress Madonna.
The Russians didn't use bullets that night. They used loudspeakers. A ticking clock echoed across the frozen city.
Every 7 seconds, a German soldier dies in Russia. Tick tock, tick tock. It drove them mad. Shut up. Shut up.
January 8th, the Soviets offered a way out. An honorable surrender. Food, medical care, life.
The envoys waited. The soldiers waited. For one moment, the guns were silent.
The answer came back instantly.
Surrender is out of the question! Paulus obeyed. The envoys were sent back. And then, the Soviets opened the gates of hell.
January 10th, Operation Ring began. The Soviet noose tightened. It wasn't a battle anymore. It was an execution.
The T-34s rolled over the trenches. They didn't even stop to shoot. They just crushed everything in their path. The Germans had no fuel, no shells, no bullets. They fought tanks with shovels and frozen fists.
All retreating roads led to one place, Potomnik Airfield. The only way out, the last lifeline.
Panic. Chaos. Thousands of wounded men dragged themselves through the snow, begging to be saved.
The lucky ones got on board. The desperate ones held onto the wings until they fell. January 16th, Potomnik fell. The lifeline was cut. Now, there was no way home.
They left behind 20,000 wounded men in the snow. The Red Army walked past them like they were statues. The survivors retreated back into the city ruins, into the cellars.
But the Russians weren't done. On January 24th, they sliced the German army in two. The head was cut off from the body.
The 6th Army's brain was trapped. General Paulus moved his headquarters into the basement of a ruined department store, the Universumag. Paulus sat in the dark. He wasn't a conqueror anymore. January 30th, a final message from Hitler arrived. It wasn't help, it was a promotion. Paulus was made Field Marshal. But it was a trick. In German history, no Field Marshal had ever surrendered. Paulus looked at his pistol. He was a Catholic. He refused to give the Führer that final satisfaction. He would not shoot himself.
The next morning, January 31st, the Russians didn't knock. They kicked down the door.
The unthinkable happened. The Field Marshal surrendered. But the horror was far from over for the men left behind.
A column of ghosts stretched for miles. No food, no transport, just a long walk into the ice.
The first rule of the march: if you have good boots, you die. The Russians took everything. Coats, boots, dignity.
If you stopped, you died. If you fell behind, you were shot. The road to the camps was paved with frozen bodies. But the bullets were mercy. The real killer was smaller. Typhus. Lice sward their bodies like a living carpet.
Dysentery turned their insides to water. Men simply dissolved. Within weeks, half of them were gone.
Those who survived the march faced the trains. Cattle cars destined for the gulags. Deep in Siberia.
They were packed like sardines. Standing room only. No toilets. No heat. The doors were locked from the outside. Days later, when the doors opened, the dead were still standing, frozen solid against the living.
Siberia. The Gulag. A chain of labor camps stretching across the frozen edge of the world. This was their new home.
12 hours a day. Minus 40 degrees. If you didn't work, you didn't eat. If you didn't eat, you died.
Breakfast was water. Lunch was water with a potato skin.
Years passed. 1945. Berlin fell.
They heard the war was over. They didn't cheer. They didn't cry. They were too tired to feel anything anymore.
They started to forget. They forgot their wives' faces.
1949. Hope was crushed again.
Stalin reclassified them as war. The graves multiplied. 91,000 marched in. The trains rolled west. It took weeks, crossing a continent of ghosts. Finally, thousands of mothers, wives, and children waited on the platform. They held up old photos, faded pictures of smiling young men from 1942. The doors opened, but the men who stepped out were strangers. Broken skeletons. She looked for the boy in the photo.
She found a broken old man.
The math was cruel. 91,000 men went into captivity.
The lucky ones tried to live, but they couldn't sleep in soft beds.
Germany had moved on. The economic miracle was happening. But these men, they were stuck in the snow, stuck in 1942. Stalingrad wasn't just a battle. It was a trauma burned into the DNA of a nation. A wound that never fully healed.
But look closer. Beyond the cold, beyond the hunger, what really killed the Sixth Army? Look at the numbers. 300,000 marched in, 91,000 surrendered, only 5,000 survived.
They left behind a mountain of steel, a warning to anyone who dares to invade Russia.
Stalingrad was the turning point. After this, the German army never won another major offensive.
The snow melted. The grass grew back. Nature forgave the land.
The survivors carried the ice in their souls forever. They never spoke of it. The silence was their only way to cope.
Stalingrad taught the world a lesson written in blood. When you fight a war,
Today, a giant stands over the city.
90% never returned. They are still there.